Hi everyone, welcome to our first episode of the NVISO podcast. We've been running this podcast internally for, I think, a bit over a year, Michel, right?
Yep,
Something like
something
that.
like that.
We have about 35 episodes, and we thought, let's just try to give this a go and do this publicly. We're pretty excited because it's quite a bit different than doing this for an internal audience. But the objective of the podcast is to invite NVISO experts on the call, discuss trends and news in their area of expertise. And today, as a first guest, I have Michel Coene. Hi, Michel.
Hey, Dan.
Welcome, and thanks for being my guinea pig.
Absolutely, absolutely. Happy to be here. If I remember correctly, I was also your guinea pig for the first internal NVISO podcast, so I do see a repeating theme here.
Yes, yes, indeed. You were guest number one, I think, at the end of 2022,
Yep.
something like that. Yeah, so thanks a lot. And let's dive right in. So today you brought a few topics for us to discuss, things in the news. What would you like to talk about, Michel? Maybe first let's introduce your role in the company and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, yeah, for everyone who's listening who doesn't know me, I'm Michel Coene. I've been working at NVISO for 7.5 years now. It would at the end of 2023, where I lead the CSIR team, which means that I look after our services related to incident response, digital forensics, but also threat hunting, compromise assessments, and all our threat intelligence services, supported by an awesome team, of course. And like you said, today I brought two key
Mm-hmm.
topics down. First of all, I wanted to talk a bit about different ransomware attacks that we've been seeing over the past months, or some interesting ransomware attacks that we've been seeing. And as a second topic, directly linked to that, is also a bit talking about, okay, what do we see
Mm-hmm.
happening with our clients, or the clients that contact us after facing a ransomware attack. Also talking a bit about, okay, what's the initial intrusion vector there, and what could our listeners do to
Mm-hmm.
prevent ransomware from successfully deploying within their environment.
Yeah, and so the CSIR team, I think a lot of people will be familiar, but for people that are less familiar, I always like the analogy of the digital firefighting team of NVISO. So if a company is hacked or an organization, you're basically the one to pick up the phone day or night, 24/7, and you reach out with the team. And if you have to, you go on site and so on to do investigations and to try to contain just ransom attacks, other type of attacks, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And there it well, it depends very much on at what point in time that clients actually contact us. So
Mm-hmm.
if we are contacted at the right point in time, so before ransomware is deployed, we've had some very nice success stories in really kicking out the adversary out of the network. If you have to come in after the ransomware is deployed, the response looks a bit different, of course,
Mm-hmm.
and we're more focused towards getting the organization back up and running as quickly as possible. But of course, with their getting a good understanding, okay, how did the attackers get in the first place, and how will we ensure that once we restore, or once we go back to business, that the attackers will not be able just to jump in again and try to do the
Yeah.
same thing once again there. So a
But
bit different, but yeah, it all depends on how fast we get contacted and how fast we can respond within that environment.
mhm. All right. Let's jump into the first topic that you mentioned. So ransomware.
Yes.
How do you want to do this? You have a few maybe recent cases or news developments that you see.
Yeah, so the first one that I have here in front of me is related to Cerber ransomware, which was exploitation, or potentially I probably still ongoing, with lots of different Confluence servers, so self-hosted Confluence servers. Um, there was a big vulnerability in Confluence recently, which allowed the attackers to indeed get access, get remote code execution onto those servers itself. So there
It's
we
this one,
handled.
right?
Yeah, it's that one
Yeah.
indeed. So we handled a number of cases related to the server ransomware and these specific vulnerabilities. What we've seen there, and this is I think the interesting part, the main interesting part, and this already goes back to what we saw with proxy logon and the vulnerabilities and exchange of a number of years ago. Time goes really fast. It's already quite some years ago, I would say. Where we see that the attackers, that there's a vulnerability, a patch is brought out by the supplier of the software, and after that, what happens is that, well, the attackers, they see, there's a patch for a certain vulnerability. Let's have a look at, okay, what exactly has been patched. If you know what has been patched, you also know where the vulnerability was. If you know where the vulnerability is, you have a bit of an easier way, not always very easy, but a bit of an easier way on developing a working exploit. That's what we saw with proxy logon, the exchange vulnerabilities. And this is also what we saw now with the vulnerabilities in Confluence, where the attackers were quite fast in figuring out how to abuse the exploit, or how to abuse the vulnerability to get actual remote code execution on the system there.
And Michel, just a quick question: how does that differ for cloud and on-prem? Because I think Atlassian is still in this mode of supporting on-prem deployments for Confluence, but they're trying to move people to the cloud, right? So I suspect if you have that in a pure cloud environment, I guess it's more difficult to get insights on what exactly was patched. So do the adversaries do that by reversing the patches that are used on the on-prem installations?
Yeah, so indeed, so the also here in this one, so the cloud version was very likely also vulnerable at one point in time. Same like the on-prem. But of course, if you patch what's in the cloud, if Atlassian patches what's in the cloud and then releases the patch to the public, the adversaries, the majority of the adversaries don't have a chance to get their hands on the patch itself, which they will be able to reverse engineer. But of course, if you're then looking towards all the on-prem installations, there you have a bigger time between a patch being released and a patch actually being installed. So that's what we typically refer to as a one-day or n-day exploit that's being created. And there is always a time between a patch being released and a patch being deployed, and there it very much depends. We see that already for a long period of time, is that the attackers are getting quicker and quicker in developing a working exploit. If we look here, if I remember correctly, the patch was released on the 31st of October for this one, and then the working exploit was already available on the 3rd of November. So there you have 4 days.
Indeed, it's pretty. That gives you very little lead time to patch, right?
Absolutely, and if I even remember going further back in my mind, I think that was even over a weekend. So there. So yeah, and that's a bit the thing, right? What's the lead time for your patching? Now, I'll be very honest. I know it. I've seen it in many organizations. We are doing a lot better in terms of patching, but still there's a way to go. I also agree that it's not always very easy to say, there's a new patch coming out, we're going to deploy it immediately. You need to do some testing and everything. But still, there I think the key thing is, especially for everything that is externally facing, so internet facing, that everybody can just reach, that you really want to keep a very close eye on that, and install the patch pretty much immediately as soon as it comes out, because time after time we see it that the attackers, they're getting faster. It was the same years ago with the proxy logon ones, where we had many organizations. That one got a lot of media attention. Remember, it was on the 7 o'clock news here in Belgium, even, where they were talking about it. And there, companies were very happy. Okay, we patched within 2 weeks. We patched within a month, which indeed is typically a very decent timeline for patching if you look at what the majority of companies are doing. However, even that was too late, right? By that time, a lot of them were already impacted by proxy logon, web shells were installed. And the same was happening here.
For you, Michel, so okay, assuming that if the lead time to patches is 1 or 2 days, if people assume that they will be breached, does it still mainly come down to having good backups in place for those type of systems, or do the adversaries also pivot from something like a Confluence install to the internal environment, or do they stick with Confluence and just mess up everything that's there, or does it really go in the network?
So based on what we're seeing, it very much depends on what type of vulnerability that we're looking at and what type of threat actor that we're looking at. If we're looking very specifically in the case of Confluence here, the server ransomware that was deployed there, the cases that we investigated, there were no specific signs of actual lateral movement being successful into the environment.
Okay.
I have heard of other cases that also lateral movement was attempted, and then that might have been successful. So here, in this case, what we've seen is that, or what was reported, I'll put it like that, there were 42,000 instances, Confluence instances, or at least Atlassian software instances, were compromised within a very short time period. Of course, there you see that the threat actors, they took the road to say, we're going to impact as many organizations as possible and deploy ransomware there, and then we'll likely see how many of them are paying.
Yeah. I'm always wondering. Indeed, we can tell people to patch quicker, but if they automatically scan the internet and if all of that is available, I think a good backup plan and how do you get up and running again after you've been compromised is equally important.
Absolutely, and there's a few other things to that there as well that I'd like to mention. Is that indeed absolutely? Think about backups. Think about business continuity and disaster recovery, especially right now, it's becoming more and more important. It's already a very long time very important, but I think we now have the notion of the majority of companies who understand that they need to be able to do disaster recovery or do business continuity planning following a ransomware attack. That is, of course, already when let's say the worst case hits. I think there's a lot of different steps in between. The access, where we're talking about patches right now, about vulnerabilities in external facing systems, that's only a first step. And it's not that we're going, in the majority of cases, of course, that we're going from, there's a vulnerability and now my entire environment is encrypted. There's a lot of steps in between. And what's important is that you employ, use some buzzwords here, you employ a defense in depth strategy. It's not because one server is compromised that your entire infrastructure needs to be compromised. What do the threat actors in the Confluence example need to do, or what did they do to get access or to be able to execute commands? They needed to, or they were deploying a web shell. All right, cool. That's already something that we can detect. You can do file integrity monitoring on a system, or the commands that are executed by your web shell, be it on a Linux system or a Windows system, wherever it's deployed, you would see that your web server account is all of a sudden starting to execute commands. And that's something that we need to look at. You need to definitely have a look at, that we need to monitor for. Having visibility on your environment is paramount. You need to absolutely have it in this day and age, so that you can take action when those first steps of the threat actor are being taken within your environment. But you can look into other things as well, and this is also something that we see at our clients, or at least at the cases where we come in terms of ransomware, is when a threat actor gets access to that external facing system, they all of a sudden directly can connect to the domain controller.
Yeah, that's pretty
Should
bad.
that be possible? Well, probably not.
Yeah.
So you probably want to, not probably, you definitely want to start looking into network segmentation, what should talk to what, if somebody, and then going back to the monitoring part, if all of a sudden your web server is trying to talk to your domain controller or to an internal file server, which it normally shouldn't do, certain alarm bells should go off. So there is a lot that needs to happen, or there's a lot that happens between initial intrusion and effective deployment of ransomware in the majority of cases. So we do have a lot of opportunities, I would say, to stop the attackers
early
in their
patching
tracks.
and limiting your blast radius.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's a good
Absolutely.
one. I shared and there was some things circulating in our teams last week that I also wanted to bring up here to discuss with you. It's another trend in ransomware, something that you also highlighted internally. Can you talk a bit more about this one, because that's a bit of a new trend? Ransomware gangs themselves filing SEC complaints.
Yes, absolutely. So this was quite an interesting one where Alf V, or also known as Black Cat, they themselves went to the SEC to file a complaint on a certain organization that they had compromised. They were probably not getting the ransomware payment that they were expecting. So we already know about the double extortion, right? So you have the encryption of your data, for which you need to pay your decryptor or to get your decryption key. And then the second part is leaking your data online. Now, we see that threat actors over time, they have tried doing different things to really force an organization into paying the ransom. And they're typically they're going a bit more and more extreme into really harassing you for that ransomware payment. And this is let's say the latest evolution on that trying to force you to pay the ransom here. And here they're actually using laws and regulations, I would say, to really try to force you to pay. So very likely they first talked to the organization, said, look, if you don't pay, we will notify you to the SEC. So it's something that I will be interested to see if they're gonna do this more and more.
Yeah, exactly. If it's like the beginning of a trend where regulation is not only used to help the companies, but it can be held against them. And yeah, they even in this case bragged about or published online the fact that they don't comply with our demands, so we basically do it for them.
Yep.
And you see screenshots of them really filling out the forms, the government notification forms. So that's that pretty interesting, and I think that's also the first time that we saw that, at least that it was published online, from what I can recall.
Yes, indeed. But very likely not the last time. So it's very common, especially with ransomware groups, that they're very closely, all of the different groups, they're very closely monitoring what the others are doing, and if they have a certain success formula, they will just start copying it. I think here they were a bit, if I'm not mistaken, they jumped the gun again a little bit, because that exact regulation was only going into force 4 days later after they made the complaint. But that was just a small anecdote there. But overall, I mean, they made the notification, right? So it's
it was public.
Company,
public. I think somehow it got leaked because the group published that they filed the complaint. Very interesting. What else do you want to take a look at, Michel?
So there, I think overall, maybe let's have a quick look at the ransomware tracker and overall the figures on what we're seeing, or what we see in terms of ransomware. And this is here by Recorded Future, this ransomware tracker. I think they always publish very interesting details or very interesting statistics. What is first of all, quite interesting is that in the first, let's say, 2 quarters or the first 3 quarters, maybe even of the year, there was let's say a lot less ransomware reported. It was a lot more silent. At least that's the impression that we had here specifically, but also that we hear from various other organizations that we communicate with.
And
But that
the
now,
fact that you know, Michel, sorry for interrupting, is because less people call you probably for a ransomware incident, right?
yes,
Yeah, okay,
indeed. So less people call us, but
yeah.
just in general, also the feedback from various insurers, for example, who are
Okay.
typically one of the first ones who are contacted when a company is facing a ransomware incident. There you also hear that feedback that first half of the year, let's say, was pretty silent overall in comparison to. But that now in the last quarter, especially, we see a huge uptick on different ransomware incidents. So there's definitely a big wave going on at the moment, or at least on the time of recording.
Do you have any insight on is there like a correlation with easy to exploit public services like the Confluence example that we gave, like other vulnerabilities in web servers and so on, email gateways, or is it something else?
There's indeed. My guess it's going to be a bit of a combination of different factors. So I think one big contributing factor is the ongoing war in Ukraine currently, or at least a lot of that is attributed to the ongoing war there, the decline in ransomware attacks and attacks overall. But that now we're going back to or going beyond what we knew as a normal before the war started there. But there will be absolutely a correlation as well with easy to exploit vulnerabilities that are brought out, and there have been a number of those over the last months, I would say. So we talked about the ones in Atlassian, but also think about Citrix. Citrix Bleed, for example, was also one that was abused in lots of incidents. I think when I think about Citrix Bleed, I have to think about Airbus, which had 43 gigabytes of data leaked there as well. So there's quite a lot of things ongoing, and of course everything's going to correlate for some part with the uptick that we are seeing.
Yeah, I saw that there was also a statistic yesterday from NIST, I think, on 2023 being the year with the most newly published CVEs ever.
I was recently talking to someone about it, where I remembered. You probably remember as well, Dan, where we had for the first time. I don't know which year it was, but where we had for the first time that we had to update a lot of software because the amount of CVEs that were published were going beyond the number that we had foreseen. I don't remember which year it was, but if you see now, we're already triple of that. I think at this point in time, so it's pretty amazing to see how many vulnerabilities are reported.
There was some talk also online on that being a result of people trying to game a bit the system, to have a CVE on their name, so a lot of less impactful things and so on. But apparently there was no real correlation to that on the criticals and the highs. From what I saw, the conclusion was no, it's actually getting worse. It's not that people are gaming the system or there is a completely different process to report it. I don't think from what I saw that's the underlying reason. And also from the vulnerabilities that we report in our services, there is just a lot of things that's being released that we notify to customers, right? So a lot of critical things on the CISA list, for example. They also keep track of the known exploited vulnerabilities. Yeah, it's not like that list has been silent the past year. Yeah, interesting. Also, right before our call, there was an article that you shared also internally on from Krebs on security. Can I share
Yeah,
that one?
absolutely. So from Brian Krebs, and this was published, I think, early this morning here, Belgian time, or late last evening, where Black Hat ransomware, Black Hat or Alpha V, so they're the same, different names, where the FBI actually seized their website, so took down Black Hat. Well, the FBI, together with quite a lot of other agencies, of course. This is not a one-man show. Let's call it like that. It's a big collaboration for which, of course, it's very well done and very nice to see as well that law enforcement are really cracking down on those ransomware gangs. So here they seized the website. They also released a decryptor. If I read correctly, it was for pretty much everyone who was attacked in the last 1.5 months. So it's about 500 organizations. So it was not for all organizations, at least the articles mentioned. But still, I would consider it a win. Now, there was also a bit of a downside to that, because, well, they seized a part of the infrastructure of Black Hat Alpha V, not all infrastructure, and they also did not, to my knowledge, or at least was not published, did not arrest people that were behind the Black Hat gang, meaning that they were, after a few hours after the FBI seized the domain, there was an unseize message from Black Hat itself posted on their webpage, and I think that one is something to kind of be a bit worried about, because first of all, they're not gone, so that's very clear. They're still going, probably going very strong. Some of the affiliates may be spooked or might be scared of the law enforcement interaction there. However, to combat that, there's two things that they now have changed from Black Hat, two very worrying things. The most worrying one is that they're saying, look, we apply new rules towards which organizations you can target, and they actually phrased it as, we're actually removing all rules. So you can now block hospitals, nuclear power plants, anything, anywhere, which is, of course, not a good foresight to have. And as a second thing, what they did, to attract new affiliates, but also to make sure that the existing affiliates, so the affiliates, those are the ones who are doing the actual attack on the organizations, who use the Black Hat ransomware, who use the Black Hat infrastructure, but they are the ones who go into the organization, compromise the organization, steal the data, deploy the ransomware. They get a piece of the cake. Now, typically, for the majority of the ransomware groups, that's 60 to 80%. Black Hat now said, in follow-up of the seizing of some of their infrastructure, said you're going to get 90% of that cake, which is higher than the majority of the ransomware groups.
Yeah.
So it's a very big incentive indeed to use Black Hat to move there. Black Hat, they were, according to the recorded future statistics, were already the third biggest ransomware group in terms of attacks and successful attacks. So that's potentially going to change still. And you can also imagine that the affiliates, they're going to become more aggressive over the next period. So.
Yeah. Okay. Pretty scary development. Yeah, a lot of recent movements in ransomware land. Thanks, Michel, for those. Maybe to wrap up, you wanted to discuss what you mentioned at the beginning of the call, some of the techniques that you see for initial intrusion, right? So we already talked quite a bit about online web services like Confluence. What other insights do you have around what's typically successfully being done from your experience in the CSIRT?
Yeah, so if we're looking into the intrusions, or how the majority of intrusions are happening, or at least the initial infection vector, of course, how that's happening beyond the vulnerabilities in those external facing applications and those one-day or end-day exploits that are being used, is another big one that we see still with lots of organizations, that they provide VPN access without multi-factor authentication. So people can just go in with username and password. And I think almost all people now already know or realize that just username and password, that it's not secure. You need to have a second factor authentication there as well. Password breaches are happening on a daily basis. So that's not something that you want. And then very closely linked to that, that's also something that sometimes, to my surprise, we also see still is just RDP, a remote desktop protocol, being open to the internet, which is also providing someone a direct access to a certain organization, to a server in such an organization. And there typically it's also just username and password itself. So
I would guess a part of this are honeypots, but I would guess that a big part of the ones that you can find on services like Shodan and so on are being attacked. I remember a few years ago, for some of our clients, we did some awareness sessions, and they asked us, can you do some research on, is this still an issue, the brute forcing of RDP services?
Yep.
And I remember that we set up some servers in AWS, and immediately, I think within a few hours, we got very aggressively scanned. We deployed some logging on it, and we saw it was just full lists of username, passwords. So I remember also that it was passwords that were not it's wordless and so on, but that they also reuse compromised accounts from leaked credentials and so on. So things that they find online that used to work in the past for your organization, or maybe they buy breached credentials on an illegal marketplace. Do you see that also happening because you're doing things around threat intelligence?
Yes, absolutely. So I think there the malware is like a red line stealer. They're everywhere these days. I think that's another very serious threat for organizations, because you could say as an organization, but we have a good EDR, we have good antivirus installed on our systems, we locked down our system overall pretty well, so there's no red line stealer going to end up. I'm just using this one as an example. There's others out there. So you could say, okay, there's not going to be such an password stealer on our infrastructure. Now, what do we see happening quite frequently for the clients where we do the dark web monitoring, is that indeed that red line stealer is not going to be installed on their corporate device, but it's going to be installed on their personal device. And of course, what happens? What are many people doing? They're sitting at home. They said, I just need to check if I don't have an email that came in. I'm expecting an email. Or, okay, as a consultant, I have it myself as well. So I very frequently at the evening before, it's like, okay, was I actually supposed to go to the office tomorrow, or will I be working from home, or do I go to a client? I guess it's very recognizable for lots of people these days. So you quickly check. Of course, I have my corporate phone, but some people have just their office desktop or no corporate phone. So what do? They go onto their personal laptop, personal computer, type in their username, password, multi-factor authentication, maybe if it's enabled, yes or no, and then the passwords get stolen there. And those passwords then are resold on the dark web, and that's how you get those big password lists, and those are the ones that are being used and abused against certain companies. I think, if I remember correctly, if you know the LastPass breach from earlier this year, this is pretty much how it happened. It was a developer on his personal system. Credentials there were stolen from the personal system. They used those credentials to then get access to LastPass resources, LastPass corporate resources. So again, definitely an attestation to multi-factor authentication, making sure that is enabled, and that you of course also employ that defense in depth principle, that you do monitoring on your environment as well.
It's this one, right, Michel?
Yes, indeed.
The LastPass breach with an employee. Yeah, all right, very interesting. Yeah, looking a bit at the clock here, we mentioned that we were trying to keep it to around half an hour for our first, I would say, experiment or our beta. But shall we continue the conversation on the next one, Michel?
Yes, absolutely. So I think there, maybe to wrap it up on, the ransomware part, I think a final one that I wanted to mention. It's also one of the things that I found when initially preparing for the podcast is that's an interesting read. It's now very actual or very timely. In November, the FS ISAC released a report on Scattered Spider and Black Hat ransomware mitigation guidance. So yeah, pretty timely that we had that news on Black Hat then this morning. But I found it overall a very interesting document. It's definitely I would say a must read for people. Give some highlights on how those intrusions work and what the different things are that you can do as an organization to prevent, detect, and respond to these types of attacks. And there you also see it. It's what I mentioned already. It's a defense in depth principle. It's like you need to put in place multiple layers of detections, multiple layers of preventions. And that's already gonna go a long way. I'll put it like that. I think we also see that if you look at the companies where we have to go in to do incident response in comparison to the companies that have a retainer with us or that are part of our managed detect and response service, the magnitude of the compromises that we see happening in a company that has, for example, an EDR installed, and of course with EDR installation also someone who actually monitors that EDR and takes action on that, versus the majority of the incidents where we go in where you see, okay, there was hardly any monitoring happening here. In a good case, we see that the organizations already have an antivirus installed, but then also that's not monitored, that's not followed up. So I think there's always a positive line. I'd like to think positive. I think there's always a positive side to highlight, and it is possible to prevent the majority of these things. You can really do something. It's not a lost battle as a company, but you of course need to make sure that you take certain actions.
Yeah, that's good. A good way of a speck of light in a cloud of ransomware or something like that. No, that makes total sense. So applying some of the basics can already take you pretty far. Installing EDR software and so on, timely follow-up. Makes a lot of sense. We'll also make sure to put the documents that we show today in the notes of the episode. Okay, I think it was an interesting first run. Michel, thanks a lot for joining. For everyone who is watching, thanks a lot. Let us know what you think. This is for us a bit of an experiment, so we want to see as we go to make it as useful and as fun, as light as possible. So let us know, and wishing everyone a great year end, and see you early next year. Bye, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
See you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Dan. Bye.
Bye. Yo, Michel.